Welcome to World Power Africa.
Amid rising acts of internal and external terrorism, as well as escalating interstate aggression, the need to spend big on security or defense has never been more important for many African governments. National security is considered a government duty, including the security of the country's citizens, economy, and institutions. Every year, governments allocate a considerable budget to fight battles and protect their territories. Each country takes different special initiatives with the aim of strengthening its military capacity, including investing a lot of resources in its defense mechanisms. The part of the national budget allocated to defense covers salaries, training, healthcare, maintenance and purchase of weapons, equipment and facilities, finances military operations and the development of new technologies. So without further ado, here are the 15 African countries with the biggest military budgets in Africa. 15. Botswana. Botswana $473 million. The latest value for military spending in Botswana fell to $473 million in 2022, from $517 million in 2021. Military spending in Botswana averaged $224 million in 1977 to 2022, reaching a record high of $522 million in 2017 and a record low of $5 million in 1977. 14. Ethiopia. Ethiopia $538 million. Perhaps due to its history and location, Ethiopia has traditionally placed great importance on its military institutions, whether under the monarchy, the socialist regime of Manchester Haile Mariam, or the liberal semi-democratic regime. Since 1991, the military has always been at the center of state planning and foreign relations, and has therefore demanded a significant share of the state's meager resources. Despite a lack of transparency that is characteristic of military-centered governments, data on Ethiopia's military spending is available even for the socialist period. Ethiopia's military budget fell to $487 million in 2021 from $504 million in 2020, but then increased to $538 million in 2022. It is stated that there is a need to allocate more budget due to economic pressures in war zones. 13. Mali. Mali $591 million. In recent years, Mali has made modest progress in improving defense and security sector governance. The 2015 military programming law defines the strategic objectives of the armed forces and greater budgetary transparency. Military spending in Mali fell to $558 million in 2021, from $593 million in 2020. Military spending in Mali increased to $591 million in 2022. Spending averaged $99 million in 1961 to 2021, reaching a record high of $593 million in 2020 and a record low of $3 million in 1961. Growing at an average annual rate of 11.25%. 12. Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast has invested $651 million in its defense in 2022, despite the security problems it faces, particularly on its border with Burkina Faso, which has faced a growing attack from jihadist groups since June 2020. These attacks have already cost the lives of Ivorian defense and security forces. Sharing a border with Burkina Faso, which is one of the hotbeds of terrorism in West Africa, Ivory Coast has undertaken several initiatives to deal with the growing threat since the Grand Bassam attacks in 2016. The Ivorian government has increased its investment in defense this year 2022 to deal with increasing terrorist activity in the country. The defense budget for 2022 is $651 million, $43 million more than last year. Defense spending in 2022 represents about 3% of the government's total proposed $17 billion state budget for the year. Military spending in Ivory Coast has averaged $198 million from 1962 to 2021, reaching a record high of $608 million in 2021 and a record low of $8 million in 1963. 11. Tanzania. Tanzania has invested $749 million in its defense in 2022. It faces security challenges, with the army facing attacks from the terrorist group Ansar al-Sunnah, which is killing people, destroying property, and seizing assets.
firearms and ammunition in the area.
Military spending in Tanzania increased from $659 million in 2020 to $742 million in 2021. The Tanzanian government has increased its investment in defense this year 2022 to deal with increasing terrorist activity in the country. The defense budget for 2022 is $749 million, $7 million more than last year. Defense spending in 2022 represents about 4% of the government's total $18.7 billion state budget proposed for the year. Military spending in Tanzania averaged $233 million from 1967 to 2022, reaching a high of $749 million in 2022 and a record low of $14 million in 1967.
10. Uganda.
Uganda, with $934 million. Uganda has experienced serious political and economic difficulties caused by internal struggles for power among its various ethnic and interest groups. The military played a critical role and was at the center of the protracted crisis, although there was no serious war in Uganda, apart from pockets of insecurity caused by money robbers.
Livestock in the Karamoka region.
Uganda has allocated a significant amount of money to the defense sector every year. Uganda's military spending increased from $984 million in 2020 to $1 billion in 2021.
The Ugandan government reduced its defense investments in 2022.
Uganda invested $934 million in its defense in 2022. Military spending in Uganda averaged $198 million from 1962 until 2021, reaching a record high of $1 billion in 2021 and a record high of $70 million in 1962. 9. Angola. Angola, with $1 billion. Angola's history is filled with many challenges, and its survival as a single entity has been threatened since its independence in 1975.
The Angolan government has increased its defense investments this year to address the growing security threat in the country. The Angolan government invested $1 billion in its defense in 2022. Military spending in Angola decreased from $993 million in 2020 to $981 million in 2021. The military budget in Angola averaged $1.6 billion from 1978 through 2022, reaching a record high of $6 billion in 2014 and a record high of $159 million in 1996. Spending is estimated at $8.5 billion cumulatively for the period from 2022 to 2026. 8. Tunisia. Tunisia, with $1.1 billion, military spending in Tunisia has increased to more than 2% of the country's GDP in recent years as the fight against terrorism has become a government priority. The country has been in a state of emergency since 2015 due to continued conflict in neighboring countries and increased support for non-state armed actors and extremist groups. Despite this, the Tunisian defense sector faces high risks of corruption, mainly due to its secretive nature and the difficulties for Tunisian citizens in accessing information on military spending and equipment. Looking ahead, military spending in Tunisia increased to $1.2 billion in 2021 from $1.1 billion in 2020, then decreased to $1.1 billion in 2022. Military spending in Tunisia increased average $330 million between 1956 and 2022, reaching a record high of $1.2 billion in 2021 and a record low of $3 million in 1956. 7. Kenya. Kenya, with $1.1 billion. Kenya is bordered by two unstable countries, South Sudan and Somalia, and there is a need to strengthen border surveillance to secure poorer borders, particularly the border between Somalia and Kenya. Kenyan President William Ruto has sent Kenyan defense forces to eastern DRC to fight M23 rebels in 2022. Kenya has allocated $1.1 billion for its defense in 2022 to upgrade its equipment. The country has acquired helicopters, unmanned aerial vehicles, armored vehicles, border surveillance, and monitoring equipment. These modern equipment will strengthen its security on the coast, its territorial waters, and its lands to fight against illegal activities that compromise its security. This initiative will place Kenya at a higher level or position to detect any threats to its security.
The decision is motivated by the fact that the Kenyan coast is used as a transit point for international human traffickers to transport people, especially women, from Africa and Asia to Europe and other parts of the world. Military spending in Kenya has increased from $22 million in 1971 to $1.1 billion in 2022, with an average annual growth of 11.3%. 6. South Africa. South Africa $2.90 billion. Since South Africa is the most advanced economy on the African continent, it has one of the most powerful armies in the world. However, analysts have warned that the country's military has been in a state of critical decline since the end of the Namibian War of Independence. Military spending in South Africa has seen a sustained period of decline since then. The Defense Department and military leaders have lamented debilitating cuts to its budget over the years. South Africa's defense budget for 2022 decreased slightly from the previous year's adjusted allocation of $3.2 billion to $2.9 billion. Military spending in South Africa averaged $2.1 billion between 1951 and 2022, reaching a record $4.5 billion in 2011 and a record high of $60 million in 1959. 5. Libya. Libya $3.4 billion. The polarization of Libyan politics and subsequent fighting between rival militias has created a security vacuum in the country, allowing the proliferation of crime and terrorism. Although these security risks remain high in the medium term, there is now some room for improvement. The ceasefire agreement in place offers the possibility of greater political stability. This would have cascading effects on Libya's defense sector, economic growth, and the lifting of the UN arms embargo would boost the development of the local defense industry and open up defense trade opportunities with other states. However, Libya is ranked among the 5 African countries with the highest military budget, at $3.4 billion in 2022. Military spending in Libya has averaged $900 million between 1959 and 2022, reaching a record $3.9 billion in 2013 and a record high of $5 million in 1960. For Egypt. Egypt with $4.3 billion. Egypt has one of the largest military forces in the Middle East and North Africa, as well as the region's largest inventory of major weapons. It plays a crucial role in the security of the Middle East as a gateway to Europe, and its military spending reflects its involvement in the machinations of such an unstable region. Military spending in Egypt has undergone marked changes, going through different phases of decline and increase. As the main Arab country that has confronted Israel since its establishment in 1948, Egypt has allocated a significant portion of its limited resources to building weapons and maintaining military strength with its neighbors, in the face of growing perceptions of intensified domestic and regional security threats. Under the presidency of Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, Egypt has made considerable investments to modernize and train its armed forces. In 2022, military spending in Egypt decreased to $4.3 billion from $5.1 billion in 2021. Military spending in Egypt averaged $2.6 billion between 1962 and 2022, reaching a record high of $5.4 billion in 2015 and a record high of $249 million in 1962. 3. Morocco. Morocco with $5.4 billion in recent years, Morocco has launched major military modernization programs with the acquisition of new helicopters, fighters, missile and air defense systems. Moroccan defense spending has increased from a budget of $3.5 billion in 2018 to a peak of $5.4 billion in 2022, reflecting a compound annual growth rate of 3.2%. The Moroccan government is expected to acquire transport aircraft, multi-role fighters, submarines, missile defense systems and armored vehicles, among others. Additionally, opportunities in security systems and platforms such as military wireless and networking systems, motion sensors, alarms and radar systems are expected to emerge as a result of the country's focus on strengthening border security. Military spending in Morocco increased from $4.8 billion in 2020 to $5.3 billion in 2021. Its defense budget averaged $1.3 billion between 1956 and 2022, reaching a record level of $5.4 billion in 2022 and a record high of $23 million in 1956. 2. Nigeria with $5.8 billion. Manchuria's defense budget has increased by 262% over the past 5 years, from $1.7 billion in 2017 to $4.5 billion in 2021 and $5.8 billion in 2022. Despite this increase, Nigerians feel that their national security architecture is not as effective as it should be due to very tangible and discernible realities, such as insurgency, widespread militarization, kidnapping, piracy, banditry, conflicts between herders and farmers, robberies, ritual killings, cultism, rape, and the high number of internally displaced people. While this seems true due to the current security challenges spread across the country, significant resources have been allocated to the defense sector by the federal and state governments over the years to strengthen security and fulfill their responsibility statutory to protect the lives of Nigerians. Nigeria's military spending increased from $2.5 billion in 2020 to $4.5 billion in 2021. The country's military budget averaged $1.2 billion from 1960 until 2022, reaching a record high of $5.8 billion in 2022 and a record low of $23 million in 1960. Although military spending alone will not be enough for Manchuria to win the fight against insurgencies, protecting lives and citizen property is the first responsibility of any government in a democratic society, and the Nigerian government shows this in its defense budget allocation. 1. Algeria with $9.7 billion. Algeria has spent $9.7 billion on military spending in recent years. Algeria's military spending is at a very high level, with the defense budget being the highest in the region. There are many reasons for this. First of all, Algeria experienced a real tragedy in the 1990s due to the Islamist insurgency, a war that lasted almost 10 years and caused considerable economic losses and incalculable human losses. There was an urgent need to equip and rebuild the army after the war. Second, the unstable and explosive geopolitical context in the region. Algeria is surrounded by areas of tension. In the east, there is instability and war between militias in Libya. In the south, Mali is confronted with Islamists and guerrillas. In the southeast, Niger suffers from drought and famine. To the west, there is Morocco, with which Algeria has had tumultuous relations since independence. Algeria needed to equip itself with an efficient and well-equipped army to secure more than 7,000 kilometers of border with its neighbors. To do this, expenses must be substantial. Military spending in Algeria increased from $9.1 billion in 2021 to $9.7 billion in 2022. Military spending in Algeria averaged $3 billion from 1963 until 2022, reaching a record high of $10.4 billion in 2015 and a record high of $66 million in 1963. Economic progress is almost impossible in a state of insecurity, which is why it is important for countries to secure their borders and borders. Territories. One of the surest ways to do this is to spend a lot of money on the purchase of weapons and security equipment, the construction of military facilities and technologies, as well as recruiting, paying, and training of security personnel. Although each country in Africa has its own defense budget, some spend more than others. World Power Africa wishes you many thanks to each of you for your support. Stay tuned for exciting new surprises to comings to our next videos.